Ghostwire Tokyo is a self-parody, telling jokes to make fun of Japan's fascination with folklore traditions, saluting the imagination behind them as much as it spoofs them. It's less of a game than it is a brochure, a travel guide, a tour trekking through Tokyo on a collectible hunt, highlighting some of Japan's most celebrated cultural exports and some that you've never even seen or heard of. At its core, it plays like a walking simulator, a brief flight through an open world, recreating in great detail the hotspots of perhaps the most energized city in the world, allowing you to examine its landmarks in first person as if you were using Google Earth. It's a model view constructed to capture Tokyo's architecture, to share its spirit, and to impress upon us how highly the developers at Tango must think of their home to welcome us as visitors. Ghostwire Tokyo has a short story following a young man, Akito, the sole survivor during the mass vanishing act that relegates Shibuya to a ghost town, and his companion via possession, fittingly the paranormal investigator KK. They share a body and banter, juxtaposing the old versus the young, commenting on how much our world has changed in such a quick pace through the use of advanced technology. KK shares his powers with us, the ability to weave ether and the elements of wind, water, and fire as he seeks to aid Akito to save his sister from the mad scientist specializing in exorcisms of the soul from the body. Alone, they aren't great characters, lacking sufficient backstories to develop them in order to make us care for them in a story that rushes along too quickly to develop traction. But together, they develop good chemistry over the course of the main missions and side quests, teasing each other at their shared expense. KK's story is an interesting one, a story that might have served better as its own narrative, with more details about his time as a spiritual detective with his persistent partner Rinko and the mysterious Ed, who only relays messages through pre-recorded phone calls and recordings. Ghostwire Tokyo could have been a more engaging experience if it had focused on telling the story through these elements. If it had embraced these original characters and their components, the lore of the vanishing and the visitors, instead of trying to water it down in lieu of the famous lore of the yokai that have already been well established in other media such as Neo. The yokai are really cool, and they do deserve spotlight in this game for people who might not know about them, but Ghostwire Tokyo should have been more than an open-world scavenger hunt with levels of annoying collectibles that rival the 2009 game Infamous, and a repetitive and restrictive combat system that on its surface looked to be as promising as something like Bioshock, but in reality is just spamming one attack with one button with haptic feedback. Occasionally, there are cool animations of pulling out cores and ripping apart the enemies, but the combat is never used to its full potential thanks to mostly brief and uninspired encounters in free roam. I expected Resident Evil or Evil Within level scares, but Ghostwire's tone is tamer, more aloof than legendary producer Shinji Mikami's defining achievements. His contribution here seems muted, and I'm curious to know how the project that was supposed to be Evil Within 3 changed course so drastically, and if the developers really thought that 50 hours of collectibles was a fun model for a game. The Vanishing liberates many spirits, both foul and friendly, namely the visitors, ghastly embodiments of negative emotions, such as the headless dancing schoolgirls with the iconic Japanese uniforms and high socks, undead business people with the umbrella shields, or tall scissor women. They patrol the streets and skies and most of the time stray without anything to do, much like the player or like the large numbers of animal refugees unleashed upon us, the dogs and cats that you can pet, and the minds of theirs that you can read, revealing to us what we imagine they think of us from day to day. This is probably the coolest part of the game. Make of it what you will. By doing this act of kindness, we can be rewarded with valuable clues or currency to purchase items from the cute yokai Nakamata, acting as store vendors and shop owners. The stores are stocked and decorated with interesting Japanese snack foods, as are the street corners, flashy with exotic offerings both domesticated and internationally known. A lot of this stuff is cool, but it's just window shopping, looking at things you can't do anything with. You acquire 123 relics to trade for currency and outfits that you only get to really see during cutscenes because the game is first person. I can appreciate little things like the slightly humorous tanuki and their silly disguises, the prayer beads that give you additional powers and enhance your abilities, the detail on the 50 unique food items that restore your HP, the shrines that gradually increase max HP and SP for your elemental attacks. You rank up 50 times, but it only ever adds a marginal increase to HP or skill points to expand a very simplistic upgrade system, which was useful playing on hard mode, but it could have offered more. By the time I completed the last main mission, it was too easy for me as I was already too overpowered for the bosses to pose much threat, once again on hard mode. There were 23 types of visitors, and they do have interesting designs, with some of them having really cool showcases and side missions, but outside of a few boss battles it doesn't seem like there's much variation, and during exploration they can mostly be skipped unless they appear as part of a mandatory fight, guarding an item or blocking your story path. Unless you're a die-hard completionist, it would seem that most of Ghostwire Tokyo can be skipped as well. Ghostwire Tokyo's world has good design qualities, such as its photorealism style that had me checking my surroundings to see if I was indeed in a video game, and upon finding that out, I wondered where the action would be. I had hopes for this game, partly because of the brand recognition of Shinji Mikami, because the outline of the game seemed promising. There is some nice imagery and music in Ghostwire Tokyo, and occasionally a few tense moments, but there are far more atmospheric and authentic renditions of Japanese life in recent video games, so I have to say that overall, Ghostwire Tokyo is just average, a 6 out of 10, and that's my stamp on it. Hopefully Tango and Bethesda can learn from this experience and do something better with more originality. After all, we know the city where they make the best video games is called Tokyo.